Pastor Rob and Miss Dawn are in Florida. Pastor Rob sent me a text message yesterday, said that they were getting ready to go to the Fountain of Youth and that he may come back with hair. He sent me a picture of them taking a drink, and a little caption below it says, "Feeling younger already." And I replied and said, "Feeling younger and looking younger are two different things." So they're having a great time. Miss Dawn sent another text out this morning, and I guess the condo they're at is over a lake, and the sunrise was coming up, and she was sharing with the worship team, wishing that she was here, but was praising the Lord where they are. So they are there. Pastor Watts and Miss Karen are supporting MJ at a basketball tournament this weekend. I got a text yesterday. I haven't seen an update, but they did win yesterday, and so they were really excited about that. So as Karen put it this morning, you're stuck with me. So I'm going to share a little bit this morning. I have a story that I'm going to read to you first, and then we'll get on into our talk this morning. A man sat reflecting over his life and his relationship with the Lord. As he thought back to his early years, his first memories always seemed to revolve around being in the church. He can remember playing with toys, being outside, building forts, climbing in trees, but he also remembers being in the church. He remembers having to sit in the front two pews during service. He remembers seeing people getting dunked in a bathtub. He remembers first walking in the glass doors, and to the right was a water fountain, a big wooden important-looking board with numbers on it, and the men's boys' bathroom. He remembers the church being surrounded by cornfields. He remembers walking back a hallway into a room that you had to be quiet in. He also remembers when he moved from this town to another town that wasn't just a town but a big city. He thought about what it would be like and what the church would be like. He didn't have long to wait because in this new city, he lived next door to the church. He still had to sit in the first two pews and behave. Sometimes he got the privilege of sitting on this platform when he didn't behave. He remembers a great deal about this church because this is basically where he grew up, at least through high school. He remembers a lady that he called Grandma Gum. That's because she always had gum to give to the kids. He remembers candlelight services. He always did like those. He remembers sing-alongs where you actually got to tell the preacher what you wanted to sing. He remembers youth mission trips. He remembers all the good times in this church. Somewhere along the way, he decided that he needed to ask Jesus to come into his life. He did this at the second church, he thinks. The first time he did this, he really didn't know what it meant. He knows that now. But he did it anyway, and he tried to live a good life, doing the right things. While after doing this, he remembers his walk with the Lord. He remembers that communion meant something different now. It was important. Worship wasn't such a chore anymore. He didn't get called to the platform as much. He remembers he even got involved in worship service. As he got older, he tried to keep the walk with the Lord first. He tried to grow his relationship with the Lord. He even did some teaching, starting with the kids. He got involved in Vacation Bible School and really enjoyed that. He got a call about being a counselor at a church camp. He really enjoyed that and did it a few times. After he got out of high school, he moved away. He was going to be a farmer, you see. Well, he ended up moving back to the farming community that the first church was in. He remembers going back to that church and getting involved there. After a while, he decided that he needed to get a job. He moved out on his own. With work and school, church seemed to get the back burner. He started going less and less. And with going less and less, his relationship with the Lord became strained. He remembers he wasn't as close as he should be. He didn't always do the things that he should do. He started to feel lonely, out of sorts, didn't fit in, empty. He decided that he needed a change of scenery. Even though he'd been at this job for a couple of years, when his grandfather called and offered a job, he jumped at it. So he moved again. Now he remembers that his grandparents and the family where he moved were church-going people. At first he went back to church. He remembers that he tried for a while, but he failed. He failed at growing his relationship with the Lord. He worked for a couple of years for his grandfather, and then he started to feel the same way he had before. You see, he had made some bad choices and didn't do what he should. So once again, he decides that he needs a change. This time, he felt he needed to be family, with family, mom and dad family. So once again, he moves back home. He remembers that when he went back home, he tried to work on his relationship with the Lord. He even remembers rededicating his life to the Lord. He got back in church. This was a new church. He got back involved with service and teaching. He even worked with the youth group. This was something he really enjoyed. He had a real connection with the kids. It was going so good, and his walk with the Lord was growing, that he even got to do some youth rallies and youth camp meetings. It was a great time. He was really growing with the Lord. At this point in his life, he was asked to be a youth minister at a church. He thought about it for a while and decided that he should go. He has some fond memories of this church. It was a small church, and he got along with almost everyone there. He not only worked with the youth, but he also helped lead the worship services. He even got to talk and got up the courage to do some singing. During this time, he had to get a job, so he started working for the same company he had so many years before. Things seemed to be going good, and his relationship with the Lord seemed to be growing. He remembers, though, that some things happened, and he got really hurt. He isn't sure exactly what all happened. He just remembers feeling hurt and not going back to the church. In fact, he made up excuses not to go to church at all. He had to work. He was tired from work. He didn't need to go to church to have a relationship with the Lord. His relationship with the Lord got put on hold once again. Instead, he put all of his energies into his work. For the next 15 years, he worked. Now, don't get me wrong, he did other things too, like get married, have 3 children. He worked, though, most of the time. When he would visit his parents, he would go to church. Always got emotional when he went. Something was really tugging at him, but he couldn't put 2 and 2 together. He remembers how much he enjoyed work. It helped that he was really good at what he did. He didn't get into church, though, even when his wife and children would go. He was always too busy. Towards the end of the 15 years, he started to get the same old feelings that he had before. He remembers doing some things that he really isn't proud of, and some things that he really wants to forget. He remembers making several visits home and remembers some of the church services he attended. Something was really bugging him. Something was getting to him. He realizes now that it wasn't something, it was someone. But he didn't realize that then. It got so bad, though, that one day he just up and quit his job. 15 years, a total of 17 with one company. Promotions, good money, good reputation, great future, and he up and quits. He remembers calling his wife to tell her that he had just quit his job. What are we going to do? He didn't know. But he did know that he couldn't live his life like this anymore. He didn't do anything right away, and then he decided that he needed to move back home. He needed to get back in church. He needed to get his relationship right with the Lord. As he thinks back to this time, it wasn't a should or a needed to, it was a want to. Probably for the first time in his life, he had a real want to get a relationship with the Lord. and not just a relationship, but he wanted to walk with the Lord. So he moved, and he's working on that walk. He knows that it isn't always going to be an easy walk, but now he has the want to make a walk a lasting one. Maybe parts of this story sound familiar. Maybe when you hear the whole story, it is hard to see how it relates to you at all. What I would like you to think about is the man's relationship with God. If you think about that relationship, I think you might be able to relate at least to some of the story to your own relationship. Maybe. When people talk about being a Christian and doing this and that, or behaving this way or that way, I always go back to being a Christian is all about having a relationship with God. That is all he wants, just to have a relationship with me and with you. It's that simple. God created us, so we are a child of God. It only makes sense to me that since we are his children, that he wants to have a relationship with us. Pretty easy, seeing as we make and have relationships every day in our lives. In order to have that relationship, we must realize and accept a few things. Sin is a real thing, and we all have sinned. Jesus died and rose again for those sins. My sins, your sins, all of our sins. If we accept these things and accept Jesus into our lives, then we do not have to sin anymore. No matter what you think, no matter what you are doing right now, no matter what anyone tells you, with Christ in you, you do not have to sin anymore. It's your choice. Okay, now that I've said that, most people are saying, yeah, right. Wait a minute. You don't understand. You don't know where I'm coming from. In a perfect world, don't worry. I get it. Sometimes I feel like everyone thinks or feels that once you become a Christian, there's a little switch that goes off in you, and all of a sudden you are a great, compassionate, loving, giving person, and nothing goes wrong. And if it does, then you really aren't a Christian and you have done something wrong. Well, that's just not the case. Why isn't it the case? Because there's something called the flesh versus the spirit. And that's what I want to talk about today. As you know, I like to try to keep things simple so my brain can function. I like to try and break things down. So what is flesh? Flesh is me. It's not just the physical, but the mental as well. So what does me versus the spirit? Well, usually whenever you have a versus involved, that means there's some sort of conflict. So it's me, you, physical and mental, having a conflict with the spirit. If you go back to our story, doesn't there seem like there was a conflict going on? This person started a relationship with God, started a walk with God, but somehow things got all screwy. Other things got in the way of that walk. Job, relationships, feelings, time. Things we go through every day. I'm sure if you think about it real hard, or maybe not so hard, you could come up with your own list. Well, someone might say, okay, he wasn't that secure in his relationship. He didn't really mean it. He did something wrong. Or you might even be saying that about your own walk or relationship with Jesus. Romans 7:15 through 18 states, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, but I do what I hate to do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. This is Paul. Most people would say a holy man, righteous man, a leader in the church. Would you say he wasn't secure in his relationship with God? Yet here he is saying exactly what we're talking about. Let me put it into my own words. I don't understand. I am frustrated. I know what's right, but I don't do it. I know what is bad or wrong, and yet I do that instead. I know the Bible, God's Word, the truth, is good and good for me. When I make the wrong decisions, do the wrong thing, it is almost like there are two of me. The one who wants and desires to do the right thing, and then the one who does the exact opposite. I find this passage very comforting to me. It means I'm not crazy. When I screw things up, I start getting depressed about it and worried about it and second guessing my relationship, I stop and think about this passage and say, wait a minute. Even Paul, a great man of God, struggled with this. So what's the problem? Until we get into heaven, there's always going to be sin around us. Bad things, temptation, decisions that are going to move us to a closer relationship or move us farther away from God. Wait a minute. I thought once you became a Christian, that little light switch turns on and you don't have those thoughts and desires and feelings anymore. That's where the flesh comes in. That's where I come in. I get in the way. Colossians 3:9-10 says this, do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. This is where I get in the way. The old self. The old thoughts. Let me put this one in my own words. Quit telling me it is what it is. I am who I am. I'm only human. Don't you get that is the old you before you started your relationship? Once you started that relationship, there is a new you. And by building that relationship, your thoughts and actions will continue to change to those of Jesus. Galatians 5:16-17 says this, so I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. It isn't enough to know who you are in Jesus, but you have to know who Jesus is in you. Romans 7:24 states, what a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? In other words, how miserable, frustrated, confused, tired I am. Who can save me? Think back to our story again. Every time the man got further away from his relationship with God, he got these feelings. Loneliness, emptiness, frustration. He tried to do everything that the world tells us to do. Move, get a good job, make a lot of money, get married, have kids, have a good reputation, do good things, and yet nothing helped. No one and no thing on earth helped. So who can save me? Jesus. The only true success story. The only author of the real how-to book. The only one who took the world on, took sin on, took the devil on, and won. Not only won, but crushed them. So, I have to get out of the way and let Jesus do his thing. I have to stop worrying about me and let Jesus do his thing. I have to get out of my comfort zone and let Jesus comfort me and do his thing. I have to realize that I can't do it and let Jesus do his thing. I can't make it happen. I have to let Jesus do his thing. I have to give up the old life and let Jesus do his thing. I have to get out of his way and let him lead the way. John 3:30 states, he must become greater, I must become less. I have to get out of the way and let Jesus do his thing. If you have a relationship, you have the power to overcome flesh. Don't take my word for it, take God's word. Romans 8:11 through 13. And if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies, because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation, but it is not to the flesh to live according to it. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. Just get out of the way and let Jesus do his thing. This is part of the sermon that if I was sitting out there instead of up here on stage, I would start coming up with the reasons why this wouldn't work for me. Some of you might be sitting there saying, Paul, that's easy for you. You were raised in the church your whole life. Look who your dad is. Look who your brother is. It's easy for you. You don't understand what I'm going through in my own life. You don't have to deal with the things I do in my life. I wasn't brought up like you were. My life has been rough. You just don't understand. The man in the story is me. The story is my life. I had and still have to get out of the way too. We all have to get out of the way and let Jesus do his thing. Let's stand.